important system of your body because the lymphatic system is responsible for immunity. It provides immunity or defensive functions of your body. First, we will see the parts of the lymphatic system. Then we'll see the cells of the lymphatic system. Two types of cells are the main warriors or fighters, T cells and B cells. So we'll see the origin and function of T and B cells, from where they come and how they fight. Then we'll talk about lymphoid follicles. What are the follicles? Then we'll talk about the lymph organs, lymph nodes, spleen, thymus, tonsil. We'll talk about those organs. Then we'll talk about a couple other things, Peyer's patches and lacteals. What are those two things? First, the parts of the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system consists of lymphatic organs. Lymphatic organs include lymph nodes, tonsils, thymus, spleen. So those are main lymphatic organs. Lymph nodes are small, many in number, distributed throughout the lymphatic system, and solely responsible for immunity. So remember, those three lymph nodes are many, distributed throughout the lymphatic system, small in size, and those are only responsible for the immunity. They don't have other functions. These three lymphatic organs are larger or bigger in size, and they have other functions too. They have other functions. For example, you know that the spleen, it provides immunity, but spleen is a site for red blood cell destruction. You know that, right? Liver and spleen are called the graveyards for the red blood cells. They have other functions, these three. So those are the lymphatic organs. Then you have lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic system is a circulatory system. You know that main circulatory system of your body is the blood circulatory system, cardiovascular system, right? But lymphatic system is also a circulatory system because it has the vessels and fluid, lymph circulates inside it. Anyway, so lymphatic vessels include capillaries, lymphatic capillaries, collecting vessels, trunks, you know arteries have trunks too, pulmonary trunk, right? So trunks and ducts. So those are the lymphatic vessels. Capillaries, collecting vessels, trunks and ducts. capillaries are the smallest, right? And capillaries give the fluid to the collecting vessels, then fluid passes through the trunks, and then finally the fluid goes to the ducts. We have two ducts in the lymphatic system. Those are the largest vessels. How many? Two lymphatic ducts, and those are the largest vessels. We'll see those shortly. Then you have the fluid, that is called the lymph. Lymph is the fluid that circulates inside the lymphatic vessels or lymphatic system. This fluid contains T and B lymphocytes. So those are the important cells present in the fluid. Now, from where the fluid comes into the lymphatic system? You know that in the tissue of your body, you have a fluid that is called the interstitial fluid. Tissue consists of cells, you all know that, many cells, and in between the cells you have the fluid that is called the interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid. Okay. In the tissue, you have the lymphatic capillaries. These are the lymphatic capillaries. They are dead-ended or blind-ended. They don't have anastomosis like blood capillaries. You know, blood capillaries form network, right? Capillary bed. In case of lymphatic capillaries, they don't form network. They end individual. So, also in the interstitial spaces of the tissue, you have the blood capillaries. You know that blood capillaries everywhere, right? So these are the blood capillaries. Okay. So blood capillaries and lymphatic capillaries both are present in the tissue. What happens? From the blood capillaries, the fluid is secreted in the interstitial space, and that's the interstitial fluid. So interstitial fluid comes from the blood. The capillaries secrete that fluid here, and then that fluid enters into the lymphatic capillaries. So comes from the blood and then enters into the lymphatic capillaries. And once the fluid enters into the lymphatic capillaries, that is the lymph. Okay. So lymph is the fluid, interstitial fluid that enters into the lymphatic capillaries. Make sense? Now, one thing is important here. Once that fluid enters into the lymphatic capillaries, the fluid cannot get out because there are doors or valves here. Those valves open only inwards, one direction. So we'll open this way, so the fluid will be able to get in. But if the fluid wants to come out, the valves will get closed. Okay, so only fluid can get in but cannot get out. Make sense? Okay. Now another very important thing is why from the interstitial spaces of the tissue the fluid should enter into the lymphatic system, because most of the time the microorganisms, bacteria, virus, fungus, those microorganisms or antigens, they are present in the tissue and float in the interstitial fluid. So the lymphatic capillaries take that fluid to take those microorganisms inside or antigens inside, so it can destroy So that's the purpose of taking the fluid inside, because with the fluid, the microorganisms will enter into the system. Make sense? Lymphatic system. So that's why the fluid is continuously getting in the lymphatic capillary to the lymphatic system. Okay. So here you see in the top right picture, in the tissue, you have a blood capillary bed that you already know, and you see the green structures. Those are the lymphatic capillaries. So lymphatic capillaries are dead-ended or blind-ended, but blood capillaries form network capillary bed. If you see only a small part of lymphatic capillary, here you see the picture lower one has the valves, flap-like mini valves that I mentioned here, that will open only inwards, so the fluid will get in but will not let the fluid get out. So flap-like mini valves are present in the lymphatic capillaries. Also, you have filaments. At the end part of the lymphatic capillaries, you have many filaments. Those filaments anchor the lymphatic capillaries with the surrounding tissue. So anchor the capillaries, so they will not move much. Now see the top left picture. This is the lymphatic system, the green structure, and this is the blood circulatory system. Here the interstitial fluid enters into the capillaries, then the collecting vessels, you see the collecting vessels, receive the fluid from the capillaries that I mentioned, and then fluid passes through the trunks. There are many trunks, and finally the fluid is given to the ducts, and we have two ducts in the lymphatic system, right, that I mentioned. How many? Two. Those are the largest lymphatic vessels. And then what happens, you see the ducts give the lymph fluid to the large vein close to the heart. So actually the fluid is finally going to the blood circulation into the vein. Which vein? Subclavian vein. You already know the subclavian vein here, right, under the clavicle. So the lymph enters into the subclavian vein. So basically you see here, I told you that the fluid is coming from the blood capillaries and circulating inside the lymphatic system, and finally again going to the blood. That cycle is going on continuously. Okay, from the blood to the lymphatic system, then again to the blood, and then entering into the lymphatic system again. The goal is cleaning the fluid, destroying the microorganisms and antigens. The same picture here, you see the lymphatic system. So, if I ask you, what are the differences between the lymphatic capillaries and blood capillaries? You already know blood capillaries often form network, that is called the capillary bed, right? Lymphatic capillaries, they don't form network. They are blind-ended or dead-ended. Blood capillaries don't have flap-like mini valves, but lymphatic capillaries have mini valves, open only inwards to let the fluid get in. Blood capillaries don't have filaments to anchor them, but lymphatic capillaries have the filaments. Blood capillaries secrete the interstitial fluid, and lymphatic capillaries take the interstitial fluid inside. So those are a few differences between them. Now, the lymphatic vessels, the larger lymphatic vessels. They are similar to the veins of our body. If you see a lymphatic vessel, not the capillary, the lymphatic vessel and a vein, the lymphatic vessels, the wall of the lymphatic vessels is thin, thinner than the veins. We know that the wall of the vein is thinner than the artery, but lymphatic vessels wall is even thinner. And inside the veins of your body, you have valves. Lymphatic vessels have also valves, but in lymphatic vessels, you have more valves present. Then there are two sets of lymphatic vessels, superficial lymphatic vessels and deep lymphatic vessels. Superficial vessels are also called the collecting vessels. They are just under the skin and travel with the superficial veins. You remember the superficial veins, great saphenous, cephalic, basilic, those are under the skin. So the collecting lymphatic vessels are superficial and they run with the superficial veins. Deep lymphatic vessels travel with the arteries. They travel with the arteries because the arteries are in the deeper areas. Now, the lymph fluid is finally given to the ducts, and you already know that there are two lymphatic ducts in the lymphatic system. One is called the right lymphatic duct and the other one is the thoracic duct. Right lymphatic duct is in the right side of the body and thoracic duct is in the mostly in the middle of the body. Just thoracic duct lies on the vertebral column. If you go to the cadaver lab, try to find the thoracic duct. It is easy. Thoracic duct rests on most part of it on the vertebral column. Okay, the right one is in the right side. Now, the thoracic duct is much bigger than the right lymphatic duct. Right lymphatic duct gives the lymph to the right subclavian vein and thoracic duct gives the lymph or fluid to the left subclavian vein. You know that you have two subclavian veins. So the right lymphatic duct, since it is in the right side, gives the lymph to the right subclavian. Thoracic duct goes like this and then gives lymph to the left subclavian vein. If you see the lower end of the thoracic duct, it has an expanded area. So this is the thoracic duct. It's the lower end is kind of dilated or expanded. That is called cisterna chyli. Cisterna chyli. CIS. Cisterna chyli is the lower expanded or dilated end of the thoracic duct. So this is the thoracic duct. Okay, and the right lymphatic duct, which is smaller. So this is the thoracic duct. You see, just in the middle, and going to the left subclavian vein. Goes like this. Here. This is the right lymphatic duct that goes to the right subclavian vein here. Okay. Now this is the cisterna chyli, the lower expanded end of thoracic duct. Cisterna chyli is wider because many lymphatic vessels enter from the lower part of the body. So from the lower part of the body, the lymphatic vessels come and give the lymph to the cisterna chyli. So it receives more fluid than other parts. That's why it is wider or dilated. Okay, because the fluid comes from many vessels, lymphatic vessels. Okay, here. Okay. So here you see the lymphatic system, the green structure, which is throughout the body, and also the lymph nodes, those small lymph organs are distributed throughout the body. But in few areas of your body, the lymph nodes are more clustered, aggregated, densely present. Which areas you already know? Some in your neck, axillary area, inguinal area. In those areas, you have more lymph nodes. And that's why, when you go to your doctor for checkup, you'll see if the doctor is good. Some doctors don't do that, that. So if the doctor is good, is a good doctor, he will quickly check here, here, and here, right? Now that. To see if any enlargement or swelling of lymph nodes has occurred. Okay, that tells you that some infection or some microorganisms could be in the body. Why in those areas? Because you have more lymph nodes, the neck, axillary, and inguinal areas. So and this is the right thoracic duct, goes to the right subclavian vein. The main warriors or fighters of the lymphatic system are the lymphoid cells, T cells and B cells. Both are lymphocytes, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. You have seen lymphocytes under the microscope, one type of white blood cells, remember? Neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, monocytes. So lymphocytes are white blood cells. There are two types, T and B. Under the microscope, you can tell which one is T, which one is B. T and B are two types of lymphocytes, and those names are based on their functions. So, T lymphocytes or T cells mainly destroy the microorganisms by phagocytosis. They get attached to the antigen directly and engulf them. And B cells destroy the antigens by producing antibodies. Okay. So they fight differently. Now, why some lymphocytes are called T lymphocytes, some are called B lymphocytes? Because they get their training how to fight in two different camps. Okay, when the young kids are recruited in army or military, they are sent to different training camps, right? And they learn different things. Different person learns different techniques. So we know that your bone marrow is the site of blood cells. So from the bone marrow, the lymphocytes are produced, and some lymphocytes enter into the thymus and get their training there in the thymus. And after they get their training inside the thymus, they come out and enter into the lymphatic system and they are now called the T lymphocytes because they are trained in the thymus. Some lymphocytes stay in the bone marrow and get their training there inside the bone marrow, and when they come out, they become B cells. Okay, so that's why they're called T cells and B cells. But both T cells and B cells, after their training, they enter into the lymphatic system. Okay, and they learn to fight differently. So it's interesting, right? T cells learn to do phagocytosis, B cells learn to produce and secrete antibodies. Now you know that if you decide to fight with someone, okay, so there are different techniques, of course, right? If you see your opponent is small and much weaker than you, okay, then what you will do, you will let him come close to you, right? Okay, come close to me, I'll destroy you, okay? So you will grab him because you know that you are much stronger, right? And defeat him. Now, if you think that your opponent is much stronger than you, you won't let him come close to you, right? So you will, if you have gun or something, you will just shoot him. So B lymphocytes do that. B lymphocytes produce and secrete the antibodies, and that antibodies go to the enemy and destroy them. Okay, so they fight differently. Now, antigens. Antigens are the components that triggers the production of antibodies. That is the best definition of the antigens. Antigens are the components, any component that triggers the production of antibodies in your body. It could be microorganisms, or pathogens, bacteria, virus, fungi. It could be blood cells from another body, foreign cells, that means cells from another person's body, or your own body cells sometimes. So antigens could be microorganisms, bacteria, virus, fungi, could be cells from another person's body, foreign cells. You know that if I get another person's tissue, most of the time what will happen? Rejection, right? Your body will produce antibodies and reject, destroy them. But sometimes your own body cells could become antigens, abnormal cells. If your body produces abnormal cells, your own body will consider those abnormal cells as antigens. Make sense? For example, tumor cells, cancer cells, okay, or viral infected cells. Your body doesn't like them. Your body will try to destroy them, right? Because those are abnormal. So those are also considered as antigens because they trigger the production of antibody. Okay. So some B cells, we already have talked about T cells and B cells. Just note that T cells can produce another type of cells, helper T cell, and memory T cell. So some T cells can produce helper T cells or memory T cells. B cells can produce memory B cells. Okay, so just remember that. And plasma cells. Plasma cells. Now, these memory cells are very important because you know already that if you get any invasion of microorganism once, then the chance of getting sick second time is less. You all know that, right? Because your immune system, lymphatic system, can keep that information, save that information about that microorganism, right? And when second time that microorganism again tries to invade your body, your immune system responds very fast, quickly to destroy it because it has that information already, right, about that microorganism. So the memory cells are the cells, those are storing the information. That's why memory cells are very important. Okay. Plasma cells are also very important because plasma cells produce plenty of antibodies. We already know that B cells produce antibody, I have already mentioned, but once the B cells are converted to plasma cells or produce plasma cells, the plasma cells can produce much more antibodies. Okay, so some B cells are converted to plasma cells and produce antibodies. Helper T cells. These cells have the components on the surface cell membrane that attract the lymphocytes to come close to them and destroy. So helper T cells do what? This is a microorganism. Helper T cell will get attached to that microorganism, and that will make the microorganism more tasty for the lymphocytes to come and destroy them. So make them more attractive. Okay, so this is the microorganism or antigen. Helper T cells will first get attached to them, and then other cells will find it more interesting to eat. So come and destroy them. So that's how it facilitates the destruction. Okay, by making it more attractive. We'll learn more in microbiology when we take it. Okay, now we'll talk about the lymph nodes. You know that lymph nodes are small, many, and are solely responsible for immunity. If you see inside the lymph node, it has two areas, outer cortex and inner medulla. The functions of the lymph nodes. Lymph nodes house the T cells, B cells, macrophages, and plasma cells. So that is number one function. Lymph nodes house those important cells. They fight against the antigens. They house T cells, B cells, plasma cells, as well as macrophages. Number two, filter the lymph. This is another very important function. You know that this is the lymph node, this is the lymphatic vessel. So this lymphatic vessel brings the fluid, lymph, into the lymph node, and inside the lymph node, what happens? Filtering of the fluid. So lymph node filters that fluid to separate the microorganisms. It's like a checkpoint. Lymph node is a checkpoint where it will filter the fluid and separate the enemies or microorganisms. And then you know that the lymph node houses those cells, T cells, B cells, macrophages. They will come forward to destroy them. Okay, so will destroy them because inside the lymph node you have those cells. And then clean fluid will get out. So you have many checkposts throughout the lymphatic system. So everywhere the fluid is being checked and being filtered. Enemies are being separated. The antigens are being separated. And then T cells, B cells, macrophages, plasma cells, they are destroying them. Make sense? So, you know, if you go to US border, did you ever go? No? Okay. So if you go, we have border with Canada and Mexico, right? Canadian side, you have less checkposts. I went there every year I go across the border. So you'll see they're far from each other. Okay? In the south, you have more checkposts. We are now building the walls, probably more checkposts. Right? So very strict on the south side. And there are guards, right? And they're checking everybody getting in. So those are the lymph nodes, the checkposts, right? They're checking the influx of people. And where you have more chance of getting the microorganisms getting in, the checkposts are more. Make sense? You know, these areas are confined. Less, you know, more chance of microorganisms to grow because no air, less air is passing, right? Through the mouth, more microorganisms can get in, right? Through the nose, more microorganisms can get in. That's why you have more lymph nodes there. So you have more checkposts. And in the border checkposts, they are separating the enemies. If they suspect that this could be harmful, these people can separate them and destroy. Destroy means, you know, put them in or push them back. So whatever. So in the lymph nodes, the lymphocytes and other cells, they are waiting there to destroy the enemies. What are the enemies? Who are the enemies? Antigens, right? So that's how the fluid is being cleaned, and finally that lymph is given to the blood. Now here you see inside the lymph node, the outer part is the cortex, inner part is the medulla. So this is the outer cortex, this is inner medulla. In the outer cortex, you have these kind of round structures. These are called follicles. Follicles, lymphoid follicles. Inside the lymphoid follicles, you have lot of lymphocytes, T and B lymphocytes, heavily packed inside the follicles. So follicles are the structures in which the lymphocytes are present heavily. Okay? Now, you see here, these are the lymphatic vessels bring the fluid in. So these are called afferent lymphatic vessels. Fluid gets in. So this is afferent, and through the vessels fluid gets out. Those are the efferent. Exit start with E. Afferent start with A, remember arriving, okay, and getting out, exit E. So the number of afferent is more than the number of efferent, and there is an advantage of that. What is that? You see the number of afferent is more than the number of efferent. So more fluid gets in, but fluid gets out slowly because you have less exit. So the fluid can stay longer inside the lymph node, which helps the lymph node to filter the fluid. It gets more time to filter the fluid. And also inside the lymphatic vessels, you see you have one-way valves. That means fluid can only get in this one and get out that one. Will not be able to get back. So the fluid only will move in one direction. Will get in and get out. Once it is in, it cannot get back. Once it is out, it cannot get back into the node. This is the histology of a part of the lymph nodes. This is just showing the part of the lymph node under the microscope. So these are the follicles. You see that the kind of round structures. Inside the follicles, you have a lot of lymphocytes. That's why they are darker under the microscope. Okay, so now we will talk about the large lymph organs: spleen, thymus, tonsils. Spleen is the site of lymphocyte proliferation and immune surveillance and response. So, inside the spleen, proliferation, the word proliferation means what? Increasing in number, right? You know, sometimes we use the term proliferation of soldiers in the field, right? Battlefield. That means the number is getting more and more. So proliferation is multiplication, increasing in number. So the lymphocytes are multiplied inside the spleen. Spleen also monitors the fluid that passes through it. If it finds that a lot of antigens are entering, then it will increase the proliferation, increase the multiplication, will produce more and more lymphocytes. So depending on the need, it can produce more or less lymphocytes. Make sense? If it thinks that need to produce more, it will multiply the cells more. That is the response. Spleen also cleans the blood and removes the old cells, old blood cells. That's why it is called a graveyard. You already know that old blood cells are destroyed inside the spleen. And it also houses the lymphocytes, macrophages, and huge number of red blood cells, because we know that red blood cells go there and many of them are destroyed there. So a lot of red blood cells are also present inside the spleen. Structure of the spleen. If you see inside the spleen, if you cut the spleen and see inside, without microscope, you will see two distinct areas. The red areas, those are called red pulps, and the white areas, those are called white pulps. First, we will see the red areas or red pulps. They have shown by blue, but actually this area is red pulp. Also this area is red. The blood accumulates inside the sinuses. Sinuses are the cavities, you already know. So inside the sinuses, in the red pulp, there are many sinuses. These are the blue structures. These are the sinuses in which the blood accumulates. Although you know they have shown by blue color, but blood is not blue. So just think that many sinuses in the red pulp, and those sinuses are filled with blood. So that's why they look red. These areas look red. White pulp is this area. around the central arteries. So these are the central arteries. Splenic artery, you already know, is a branch of celiac trunk. Splenic artery enters into the spleen and divides into branches to form central arteries. And around the central arteries, the areas are not filled with blood, no sinuses there. So that area looks white. No blood in that area. The spleen is covered by a connective tissue membrane that is called the capsule, and I think just know the red pulp, white pulp, central arteries, those sinuses. If you know those things, I'll ask mainly those things. Thymus is another lymph organ located in the very upper part of your thorax, just below the neck here. Thymus in an infant is very big, large, occupies almost whole upper part of the thorax. But as we get older, our body grows, the thymus gets smaller. So our body grows, gets bigger, but thymus gets what? Smaller. And in adults, the thymus is like this size and located here. Shrinks a lot. In infants, it's very big, like occupies whole upper part of the thorax. Why in early stage of life the thymus is that big? Because you know that in our body, the immunity grows slowly, develops slowly, right? So in very early stage, just after birth, you think the infant's body doesn't have any immunity, almost very weak, right? The immune system grows, develops slowly. So the thymus is very big because it has to work more to produce the lymphocytes. As our body immune system develops more and more, the thymus gets small and less function it provides. If you see inside the thymus also has cortex, outer part is the cortex, and inner medulla. In the cortex, if you see this picture, cortex is darker. Why? You have more lymphocytes there than the medulla. Medulla has much less lymphocytes. But in the medulla of the thymus, you have the important structures. Those are called Hessel's corpuscles or thymic corpuscles in the medulla. Hessel's corpuscles or thymic corpuscles, we don't know the exact function yet, but we believe, the scientists believe that the T cells, the lymphocytes, you remember I said after the lymphocytes are produced, some lymphocytes enter into the thymus, right, to get their training. And when they come out, they are now what? They become T cells, right? So, where inside the thymus? They learn. That's the thymic corpuscle. So, thymic corpuscles are important to train the lymphocytes, to make the lymphocytes mature. Okay? So, that's what we know so far. Tonsils. 3 sets of tonsils we have: palatine tonsils, lingual tonsils, and pharyngeal tonsils. The name of these tonsils are after their locations. Palatine, you know the palate, right? So, the back of the palate, posterior end of the oral cavity, posterior end of the palate. Lingual means tongue. So lingual tonsils are grouped at the base of the tongue. Pharyngeal tonsil. Pharyngeal tonsil is attached to the posterior wall of nasopharynx. So if you go through the nasal cavity all the way back, You have the nasopharynx, part of the pharynx, where the pharyngeal tonsil is attached. Pharyngeal tonsil is also known as adenoid tonsil. Adenoid tonsil. Probably you have heard that. That one is more commonly used. Adenotomy is the removal of that adenoid tonsil. Sometimes we remove the tonsils because we know that tonsils are lymph organs, right? So they help to destroy the microorganisms. But sometimes the tonsils become too sensitive. Even those microorganisms are very weak, common cold, those kind of, microorganisms, they enter, the tonsils respond too much. And when they work too much, swelling of the tonsil occurs. When they work very hard, inflammation of tonsil occurs. So that makes the tonsils big and painful. Right? So you see, they are trying to help, but trying to help too much, doing too much that we don't need. So in that case, they become a burden, problem, instead of helping. We don't need the tonsils. Removal won't cause any problem because we have many lymph nodes, right? We have lymphoid organs, other lymphoid organs. You will see in the intestine. Intestine is very long tube, right? In the wall of the intestine, we have many lymphoid tissue. So we have other lymphoid organs or tissues in many areas of the body. So just removal of tonsil will not do a problem. So here you see the location in the upper one of tonsils. Now in the lower picture, you see the histology of a tonsil. If you see the tonsil under the microscope, you will see crypts. Crypts are the folds, inward folds. So if I see a tonsil, I will see many crypts. So these are the foldings. These are crypts. And what happens, interestingly, the body fluid, we have fluid everywhere in the body, enters and bring the microorganisms. And those microorganisms, when the body fluid leaves, microorganisms are trapped there, stay there. So if you see the crypts, inside the crypts or foldings, you have many microorganisms trapped. So those microorganisms are destroyed by the tonsils. Okay. So those are called tonsillar crypts. Inside the tonsil, you'll see the follicles. Like other lymph organs, you have the follicles, and we already know that follicles are filled with lymphocytes, heavily filled with lymphocytes. Inside the follicles, you see here one thing. Inside these follicles, you have this whitish area, germinal centers. You have the stem cells. That's why called germinal. Germinal centers contain stem cells to produce more lymphocytes. So follicles are filled with the lymphocytes heavily. Also, in the tonsillar follicles, in the center, you have the germinal cell centers where you have the stem cells to produce, multiply and produce more lymphoid cells. Very helpful. Peyer's patches and lacteals. Those are two important structures. Peyer's patches are the aggregated lymphoid follicles in the wall of the intestine. In the wall of the distal part or late part of the intestine, and also inside the appendix, you have many aggregated lymphoid follicles. You know that follicles are filled with lymphocytes, and those aggregated lymphoid follicles in the wall of the intestine and appendix are known as Peyer's patches. Having the Peyer's patches in your intestine is very helpful because you know that most of the cases microorganisms will enter into your body through two ways. One is through your nose, right, air, another is through the food, right, through the mouth, and you know that food goes to the intestine, right. So in the wall of the intestine you have those aggregated lymphoid follicles, Peyer's patches. Those are like guards. They are filled with lymphocytes, right? So if anybody wants to enter, we'll destroy them. So that's why in those areas you have more lymphoid tissues or lymphoid organs. Makes sense. Lacteals are the lymphatic capillaries, but special type of lymphatic capillaries in the intestine. In the wall of the intestine, if you see the wall of the intestine, you have finger-like structures. These are called villi. Some people say villi. Okay. So inside the villi, you have blood capillaries as well as lymphatic capillaries. So the green one is the lymphatic capillary, red one is blood capillary. So inside the intestinal villi, you have both capillaries. Now, you have food molecules, nutrients are here inside the intestine. We know that the nutrients are here. Proteins, carbohydrates, fats. Proteins and carbohydrates molecules are smaller in size, but the fat molecules, these are fat molecules, are bigger in size. So what happens here, the proteins and carbohydrates, those nutrients can easily enter into the blood capillary because they are smaller and can pass through the blood capillary wall, can easily enter into the blood capillaries and enter into the blood. But in case of fat molecules, they are big in size and they cannot easily enter into the blood capillaries. So most of the fat molecules do what? Enter into the lymphatic capillaries because in lymphatic capillaries there are bigger holes. Here, only in this part of the body, the lymphatic capillaries have bigger holes. So the fat molecules can enter into the lymphatic capillaries. So you see that fat molecules enter into the lymphatic system, but proteins and carbohydrates enter into the blood circulation. Now it is not a problem because you know that after the fluid circulates inside the lymphatic system, finally the fluid goes to the subclavian vein. You remember that? Enter into the subclavian vein. That means fluid is going to the blood, but first circulating inside the lymphatic system. That's all, right? So the fat molecules circulate in lymphatic fluid or lymph, then goes to the blood. So blood is getting, the goal is blood must get the nutrients, right? So that's the goal. So these lymphatic capillaries in the villi of the small intestine are known as lacteals. Okay, so a special type of lymph capillaries, specialized lymph capillaries that absorb fats. So write it down, specialized lymph capillaries in the intestinal villi that absorb fats. Okay, are lacteals. Here you see the histology of the wall of the small intestine. So you see many follicles. So those are the Peyer's patches, aggregated lymphoid follicles. Okay. So we'll stop here.